Hey everybody, we're going to do a little experiment with the fingerboard radius here, and we're going to have a little comparison. I don't know if we're going to say which one is better. These are both great guitars, and it's apples and oranges in a lot of ways. But this is a Texas Telecaster Highway 1 with the 12-inch fingerboard radius. This is a thin-skin Wildwood guitar, 2006 reissue of a 1962 Strat with the 7.25 radius. Let's see what we think about the difference. I hope you'll consider watching. Yeah, I guess what we'll do is I'll just play a little bit. There's not going to be that much to the video, except I'm going to give some of my thoughts and maybe some comments on specs. But this is a 7.25 radius. So a lot of you probably know that a smaller radius is going to have a little, it's like if you plug this into a circle. Somebody explained it to me, it made more sense. If you plug that into a circle, the smaller the circle is at the top, the fingerboard's going to have just a little bit, it's going to just pick up a little bit of the arc of the circle. So the smaller the circle is, the bigger the arc will be. So if you get a bigger circle, it's flatter. So a 7.25 radius is about as much of an arc as you're going to see in guitars that I'm aware of. I don't think there's a smaller one. And one thing I think, I love 7.25 neck radius, and I would say I like high action anyway. I played acoustic guitars for years, and I'm a picker, not just I like to pick from my years of playing acoustic. So it's got, I always have it, if I can, set up high, and a 7.25 neck radius with high intonation, high action is great. And it's a total myth that you can't bend strings up here. Look at that. I'm way up there. The other thing I like about a 7.25 neck radius is I feel like you get a little more snap and pop out of it. There's something about the way and it's a classic rock sound. It's got that tension in it. I think from that when there's that little arc in there, and then you're playing strings against it, and maybe even bending strings. There's just a little bit of tension, and I feel like it adds a pop and a kind of life to the string, and I think you hear that on a lot of those old albums. So I know that a lot of guitar players like 12-inch fingerboard radii, and some maybe even 14 or 16. I think a lot of acoustic guitars are 16. So go figure. And they're I'm sure they're great guitars and great players, but there is something it's got that tension and that kind of snap, and I have always thought there's a kind of tightness to a 7.25 neck radius, especially when you have high action, that just makes it great. Now this guitar is a 7.25. Now this guitar is a Texas Highway 1 Telecaster, 2007, and this is a 12-inch radius, which is kind of funny. Almost all the Highway 1s are 9.5, which is quite typical, and I have a 9.5. I decided we'd go more to the extreme, so we got a 12-inch here and a versus a 7.25. But this is a pretty flat radius. And, a Gibson is a 12-inch neck radius, if I'm not mistaken, like an ES-335 or a Les Paul. So I think it's apples and oranges. It's not like, there aren't great guitars with different fingerboard radii. And this thing, every time I play it, I mean, it's just, it starts to sink in. I will say, I think there's a little bit more of a snap, and especially on a Strat. It's got that little kind of stratty, snappy, bendy-wendy sound a little bit more at the 7.25. But this is a 12-inch radius, to me, is a little more professional sounding. I don't know if that makes sense. 7.25 is vintage, and classic rock and oldies, and it's got that sound there. I'm convinced there is a 7.25 neck radius sound, and it goes with vintage guitars. But I think a lot of the modern sound even comes from a flatter fingerboard, because I do think flatter fingerboard sounds a little different. And I think this just has a little cleaner, flatter sound. It doesn't have that kind of pop and tension to it. But on the other hand, it's in some ways a kind of cleaner, smoother sound. I don't know if that makes sense. But that this white Strat, I love playing it, but it's kind of scratchy and imperfect in its way. And you know what? I bet you any money, Blackie, Brownie, Clapton, some of those old Strats that people played on some of the great albums of the late 60s and early 70s, I bet they were imperfect guitars, but they had a certain snap to them, a certain pop and a sound that, was great. And but I noticed that this is in a lot of ways, it's got that lead guitar sound that it just sounds like a Strat from like 1970. And this, to me, is a little more professional sounding. And I really notice it when I'm playing rhythm. You know, this is a great guitar. I wasn't that familiar with it. It's got Texas Telecaster pickups. I haven't done a proper review of it yet, so just stay tuned. But anyway, I feel like the 12-inch radius is more modern and professional, smoother, cleaner, less prone to hiccups and imperfections. But I do think there's a tension and a snap when you really get up the neck and you start going to town on those 7.25 neck radiuses, which, if you think about it, people say you can't play a lead on a 7.25 neck radius. Have they ever heard of David Gilmour, Eric Clapton? I mean, all those old Jimi Hendrix, all those old Strats were 7.25. And that's that sound. It's got that tension to it. And yeah, in some ways, that old classic rock sound probably, you know, if you tried to, that's why sometimes I think people listen to Hendrix and things and they hear little imperfections in the playing that you don't hear as much in modern playing. Some of that might be attributed to the times, Hendrix's sloppiness, certain nights or whatever. Some of it might also be the guitars back then. You know, they were just a little fussier. But they also had a kind of a magical zing and snap to them. And I'm pretty sure at least it was in part to that neck radius. This one is great too. Like I said, I wouldn't want to choose. They are both super. So I'm calling it a, you know what? For my Strat and for classic rock, I'm going to call it a 7.25 neck radius. But I see why people like the 12-inch fingerboard. I actually, you know, if I could make this, wave my magic wand and make this a 7.25 neck radius and have it play just as well as it does, it plays great. I might do it. I'd hate to lose anything because I do think some things about the 12-inch radius are nice on this one, nicer in a way. I think it's a little smoother, cleaner guitar. I don't know if it's the fingerboard or what, you know, but you know, it's just it's got a polish to it when you play it that you know, some of those old vintage guitars, they sound vintage, you know, which is great, but sometimes that can mean they have that kind of rough sound, which practically every guitar from Elvis on to, you know, by the time you get to, you know, Steely Dan and stuff, you started getting into some of that really smooth stuff. But all through the 50s, 60s, and most of the 70s, a lot of the guitars were kind of rough, but they had a charm and they had a snap to them, as particularly Fenders, I guess I'm thinking of. So I'm going to call it a tie. But for classic rock, I'm going to say 7.25. If you like blues rock, if you like classic rock, then you definitely should have a 7.25 neck radius with the action set nice and high. Thanks. God bless.